Good morning, everyone. Today is August the 30th, 2016. I'm going to tell you a little story about my life as a victim of gang stalking. And, I've written and rewritten my story or narrated it so many times. And before I go on, you may not like the way I narrate it, or you may not like the fact that I'm calm when I talk about it. But there's always a story behind the calmness. I chose to become calm after 5 years, from 2011 to 2016, to stay grounded as best as I could, because what I went through those initial 5 years was not calmness. There was a lot of stress, a lot of anger, and a lot of emotional cleaning up that I had to do. So, this is the story. When I was a kid, I never thought I would arrive at this stage of my journey into a new world of injustice that happened to me since 1990. I had one of those unusual backgrounds that made me wonder if I was chosen early on to experience community harassment late in life. But that's where I am now. August 2016. I can't get emotional about it anymore. Can't afford to. But I can say I can't get too attached to too many things, and I'm totally distrustful of those close to me. But the story has to be told because as I grew into knowledge from the time the program went avert in 2011, that each person on this earth is valuable and has something to offer, personally and to others. Before I go on, I'm going to show pictures of the area I lived in. You'll see an apartment building, and I lived on the top floor. My balcony would have faced the main highway. I won't give you too much right now. You'll understand what I'm about to say as I talk about this. There will be a picture of that highway on its own, and it will show you its normal traffic pattern. That's all I will say for now. In 1990, I left a law firm after working there 1 year, one of those large corporate offices that stank of money, big secret deals that binds us to secrecy. I knew that because I was good at keeping secrets. What I forgot about was the cryptic exit interview message that the lady spoke of. She said, "You will never work again in this industry." I never really thought about that until 2012, when I reviewed the earlier years of my work history. But then I gave no thought to anything before. But one thing for sure, I knew how to work. I was a workaholic. But before I digress too far into this narrative, when I started to look at the 1990s up to 2010, there were patterns already in place to suggest to a trained eye something was happening on the outside of my work life, but would also blend into the new job I took in the spring of 1990. So what happened? May 1990, I started a new job, entirely different industry. July 1990, my father died from an accident, but could have survived with proper care, but the nurses failed to give him life-giving daily care. Nothing really happened during the balance of that year. By 1991, things were a bit strange. In the summer of 1991, I went out and traveled by transit. While on transit, a woman behind me was mumbling away. Okay, I thought. But as she got up to leave, she looked right at me, angrily, then proceeded to do the same thing on the street level. There were odd things happening with men, one trying to block me on the highway and would not let me turn off, but when I went through on a different road, he was extremely angry. Tires were torn in my garage where I parked. A man followed me on the street, and when he saw that I stopped and turned around to look at him, he did not follow me any further. From 1995 to 2007, my work harassment increased incrementally over the years to severe harassment from 2003 to 2007, not just by coworkers, but by even a temporary worker, by the manager, and then a new worker that came in. At the workplace, there was a gentleman from a different department who was always standing at the front door of the building with his mobile phone. Nothing unusual, but he worked for the IS department, and one day my friend and I went to a restaurant for lunch. The same man was on the mobile phone in front of the restaurant and did not go in. In 2004, I moved to a new apartment building, and around 2006, this same man moved into the building where I was. I moved in 2006. I left work in 2007 after my mother died, and it was the beginning of more frequent weird things. For instance, I went into a discount store, and one of the most strangest incidents occurred. There was a very strange man dressed all in black, wearing a tuxedo and a tall hat. He was extremely thin, and I noticed him at the front of the store. In one flash, he was standing in front of me, staring at me. Then he left just as fast. The next was when I went to a restaurant, and everything was fine. I sat down, I had my food, and I wasn't talking to anybody or interacting with the waiter or waitress. But when it was time to go, the waitress treated me so rudely. Everyone was staring. I paid and left. That shook me up. In 2007, I went on a trip with a group to Arizona, and it was quite a trip in that the tour coordinator was rude. But there was also a few more things. When I later looked at the pictures I took at Bryce Canyon, I saw that there were already in place gang stalking criminals in their color sensitization clothing. By 2010 September, a new super came into my building, and it was then that things started to amp up with this individual. He lived down the hall from me, as it was a mid-sized building. What began with him was the same time exit and entry following. He enlisted other tenants to do the same thing, as well as staged interactions, as well as false repair jobs. Also, there was a great movement of tenants moving in and out from an otherwise stable building. Tenants in mass, just one day, mind you, going up the street where I had gone up to avoid the main street. The whole thing went avert in the spring of May 2011 and grew progressively worse each day. It was fortunate I had the top floor balcony of the building that I lived in, and I could see the coming and going of people from the building. I frequented a particular donut shop that was for all intent and purpose always quiet. I will interject something here that I'm going to show a picture of that donut shop, but it's in the process of being torn down now. I started to notice more and more people in the parking lot, mostly men. I noticed a well-dressed male recruiter or supervisor from the network speaking to them and making them laugh. I knew he was something. But at that point, when I saw it, I couldn't name what he was. Something just rank. He just stank of something. And it was just some years later that I knew that he was a supervisor or a manager or a recruiter. There were a lot of these types occasionally sitting and talking, making it obvious through conversation. They hoped to put an individual into a psychiatric unit or incarcerate it, or maybe they would be suicided. They were stupid idiots. The donut shop became a busy hub of perp activity. A lot of people came over from the subsidized housing, and they were recruited with their mobile phones and their idiotic watching. There was one dude, particularly an older guy, who just got a new mobile phone, and he couldn't even talk properly into it. He didn't even know how to use the equipment. And what gave it away about him and certain people in the neighborhood was that one day the guy says to another perp, I've got to get another phone. This one's too hard for me to use. And the lady that responded said, well, you can get calls on any phone when somebody has been suicided. Stupid assholes. Following 24/7 surveillance, color sensitization, same time exit and entry, lies and defamation, and all that gang stalking tactics came to my front door. I will not allude to the fact that I have energy weapons at this point. I just know for sure it's physical gang stalking. There's a lot of street theater. But all of a sudden, men came up to me and started to talk to me, and one almost making a proposition. I can tell you that at that time, my emotions were helter-skelter. I can say that fear gripped me quite a bit in those early overt days. But funny, it also spiked my awareness 100% that I could spot a perpetrator far off. There's something about them, mostly their eyes, not all of them, but a lot of them. It's like they lost their soul somewhere. Even though in those days I looked at men in their cars moving slowly as if they were robots with no sense, dead people walking around. I will say at that time it was very, very strange. There was this one man, a tall man with gray hair, who wore one of those leather hats, and he was new to the block. I watched him one day. He was one of those foot soldiers. Remember, these are the early days, and I remember I phoned an investigator in the area where I lived, and this investigator said I couldn't afford him. Okay, left it. But you see, this guy with the gray hair one day walked into the building where this investigator had his office. So I tied it together that this gray-haired dude was an investigator. He looked official, just like the shirts that moved in and out of the building I lived in. But my saving grace was the camera I carried everywhere. Everyone got caught on it. They hated it, and one of them mentioned, "Why do you carry a camera?" But the big thing was the dude that came up to me at my door as I exited from my building. I'm going to just say he was from India. He was muscle-bound, who said, "The people around here don't like it when you take pictures." But you see, what these people do is the fact that if you're out on non-private property, they can't do nothing to you. Well, at this point, I thought, so what? And he left. It was heavy. The atmosphere was heavy, and I had to take time out daily to get to the point where I had to just rest. But the biggest thing came in September 2011, when the vehicle convoys came out on a Sunday evening. And that's where I'll show you what the normal traffic pattern is on that street. It was so heavy in traffic that I could see from the my balcony the repeat coming back and forth of numbered buses every 15 minutes. So I knew it was not a reroute of traffic, because after that, the traffic was so horrendously heavy that it was unbelievable. So the following day, I went to the donut shop and I just sat there. And I think it was right at that moment where I really met myself, that person that would eventually grow and mature over the coming months and years that I had lost so long ago. And there was a type of peace that came over me. And although I was still naive, and I really realized later how naive I really was, that I learned something very deep within me, that we have to believe in something higher and settle into it. I'm not saying it's easy. So I'm still naive, mind you. By October 2011, I hired an investigator, which proved to be one of the most useless and yet most intriguing. So an investigator will either come to your home or you go to their office. But he came to my home to do an interview as to what I really needed. Well, strangely, he looks at my open computer with a screensaver and made a curious remark about the picture I had on it. But what was the most unusual, he flatly told me he was a Mason. Now, I'm not going to accuse any group, etc., but that statement just came out of the blue. This would be something that I would consider much later in 2015. But it was around November 2011, traffic in vehicle and people curbed down. But I did get on chat lines, and it helped me tremendously. By the end of 2011, I met one of my relatives who I had not seen in many years. And in 2012, they invited me to move into their home. From 2012 to 2014, I lived with them, and I learned many things. So what were they? Well, gang stalking networks are everywhere, and no matter where you move, a new group comes along. Even old groups will travel. When I moved, I didn't even know that gang stalking networks move with you. I thought it was all local to my area at that point. I learned that relatives and friends are not necessarily turned over to gang stalking, but they can turn, and mine did. Let me only say this: if you are not strong, or if you are stressed, you would not have withstood what I went through. It was a process of where things went entirely overt by the end of 2013. It was so obvious that it bothered me to just recently, 2016. 7 evictions, threat of psychiatric assessment, and it goes on and on. But let me clarify, I was stressed and getting angrier day by day. And it wasn't that I burst out in anger at them all the time, but I would exhibit my anger by once in a while going down the steps with heavy steps or I bang a door. But guess what? That's not just the only reason they evicted me so many times. It's because I would not acclimate to their request to do something for them on a regular basis that I was not really capable of doing, had no experience of doing. They never cleared it with me initially before I moved in. So that's where all this grew. I'm at a stage where I just don't care, I'm not going to say too much here because it's becoming like an old story that revolves in my brain. Between 2014 and 2015, I lived with another individual, and it was the best period where I sort of regained myself. But again, I had to move. Guess where? Back to the ones I lived in 2012. Something did change. Maybe it was me. Who knows? I can't even complain. I can only say I'm just not the same person anymore. There are moments when you see the old self, but it's totally gone almost. Not even sorry about it. When you are a victim, and depending on who you are, things can change. Some stay the same and survive, others change and survive, others stay in their pain. The town where I live, the flow of perps is a bit different. The neighbors are all perps in the section where I live for sure. Strange section of big homes. A lot of people stay home. Told that most of them are IS people. Their driveways are populated by black, white, gray, and red cars. Most of them. The streets are dead in the neighborhood. But the moment I go out and get a taxi, the traffic increases. The whole scene is so unreal. But what is busy with the perps is on the main highways and at the mall and strip malls. They have to come out and view the target. Cops are involved, especially supervisor level. I don't know exactly who initiated the gang stalking on me, but I have theories, just theories. So here's the theories. The law firm I left in 1990 who threatened me also had contracted a big deal with an overseas corporation. Privy to secret negotiations? No, I wasn't privy to the negotiations, but I knew of the potential of it. Was it a case that I was a good opportunity for some insurance company that I took a life policy out on? Or remember that investigator that talked about that he was a Mason? Guess what? One of my relatives has a connection to a Masonic Grand Master. They're all really intriguing thoughts. In conclusion, I just believe that you should just get your story out in any way you can. Just say something. That's what's really important. Say something. And have it on record. Because that's your testimony in a sense. It's not your life in the deepest sense, but it is a story.